In this episode, we're going to talk about what's happening with paddle around the world. We're going to talk about your trip next week in Marbella. I'm also going to Dubai to do some coach education, so we're going to discuss what we look for there. We're going to do an underrated, overrated, which we enjoy.
Love that.
We do love that. And then also we're going to finish with our community questions.
So we've got a few different topics on our agenda today, starting with a bit of the world news in the paddle industry. Some quite big stuff going on this week.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It comes off the back of the World Championships in Dubai, and you know, the FIP recently held the premiere in Egypt, which was not massively well organised, followed by the World Championships, which, you know, again, and having been involved in several of these, it's again down to the organisation. They actually this week and you know, just a couple of days ago had the meeting with the ITF of whether the ITF will actually bring paddle under the banner of the ITF and therefore manage you know, their tournament structures and managing, you know, a lot of the ways that they do things. You know, before off camera we've talked about, you know, whether the ITF really that's a good move or not and whether that will help paddle. You know, in their report they sent out basically that, you know, paddle is seen as a discipline of tennis, which I think is probably quite unpopular. Like, it's quite an unpopular stance for all of the federations that were getting involved in that. But they essentially went to all of the tennis federations, and there's a lot like the LTA that have taken paddle under their banner. But when it came to the voting, it ended up being that, you know, the vote went in favour of you know, the rejection. So they didn't, you know, agree to take paddle under the banner. And, you know, in those couple of days leading up, obviously you had the FIP getting a bit hot under the collar with all of it, and the Player Association also coming out and saying they supported the FIP. You know, it's a difficult situation. We know the ITF from our tennis days, you know, we know the FIP. It's right now it feels like a very amateur sport because it doesn't have that, you know, really strong organisation. You know, there's different tours, you know, there's the World Paddle Tour, there's the APT, you've got the FIP now that are doing their premieres that, you know, have taken a kind of investment from the Qataris. Like, it feels like it just needs to be cleared up a bit. What are your thoughts?
It's interesting, isn't it? This, I suppose, this battle between tennis and paddle, like you say, you know, the independence of paddle. You know, a lot of federations are taking paddle within the tennis federation. We see it with, for example, British paddle, LTA paddle. But it's interesting, isn't it? Like, you know, even with the ITFs, the International Tennis Federation, like you say, classifying it as a discipline of tennis, it's paddle's got quite a tough journey, hasn't it, ahead in terms of trading off, you know, the growth that will, you know, with these federations supporting them, that will grow, but also maintaining that independence as its own sport and not being kind of put under the tennis banner the whole time.
Yeah, I kind of see it a bit like the decision for paddle to go under with the LTA in the UK, in that, you know, going with the LTA, it's been great for awareness. I mean, you know, it's now, you know, regularly in the media, tennis clubs are starting to put in, you know, the paddle, you know, the structure for the coach education now that we've been working on is, you know, is good. And I think that you would have that infrastructure with the ITF, but also you are then in the shadow of tennis. And I think that this is a difficulty with clubs and federations and anyone, you know, that want to pursue the paddle is when you put it under that umbrella and treating it like a discipline of tennis, it's almost being thought of as a kind of hobby sport of tennis instead of its own sport. You know, and you would not do that for squash or badminton, for example. You know, they're different sports, and I think that it just needs to be recognised as a different sport, whether it's, you know, through the ITF or through the LTA or, you know, through a tennis federation. I think as long as it is recognised as its own sport and pursued as its own sport with its own infrastructure, I think it could be successful. So I'm not hugely surprised at I knew this was coming with the ITF, but I'm not hugely surprised that it was rejected, because I think a lot of tennis federations that have paddle now are probably seeing it, you know, in a similar way. And, you know, I know that, you know, there was some, you know, media this week of the FIP in uproar about, you know, the ITF trying to take, you know, confronting it and trying to take it aggressively. But, you know, it's a difficult one. I don't know if the ITF would necessarily be the right path, but I do definitely think that the current setup of the FIP, it needs to be improved. It needs to be better organised, and now it's, you know, it's a big international governing body, so it needs a little bit more structure.
It's almost the process of padel and its growth, isn't it? It's the same. You see it at clubs. You know, tennis clubs put in padel, and you know, we've always discussed this. You know, that it's great for padel that, you know, the courts are popping up within tennis clubs, but then again, it's should padel fit within the infrastructure of tennis, or, you know, should, you know, what's the best approach? I suppose that there isn't one really. It's all growing the game, and I suppose there's going to be different paths for padel to take. Yeah,
and I think it mirrors the club a lot, doesn't it? And we see this. We see some clubs that put in 1 or 2 padel, and they're managed by, you know, a very enthusiastic padel player, and, you know, they'll do great social nights and they get people together, and it's absolutely fine if it's just 2 outdoor courts, for example, as part of a tennis club. But should that club, or should they build a standalone, you know, 8, 10 indoor courts, and you want a junior academy and a junior program and, you know, leagues, and, you know, it's suddenly a different beast, and you then need someone with expertise in that to drive that forward. And I feel like we're almost at that stage on the international circuit, in that, you know, the previous FIP was, you know, before the changing of this president, was very much, you know, padel enthusiasts that wanted to kind of grow the game, which is fantastic, and gradually more and more countries are registering, but, you know, now we're at a point where this is now a bigger beast, and therefore it needs, you know, more structure. It needs, you know, teams to do things, you know, and you know, we talked on the previous podcast about scheduling, but I mean, that's just the start of it. You know, it requires, you know, coach education teams. I mean, if you look at, you know, the LTA as an example, I mean, they've got, you know, over 300 employees that are managing all of these different departments. Well, I mean, the FIP is, you know, it's less than a handful of people that are trying to do everything. So, you know, that is looming now, that they need to get a bit more structure. So hopefully, and I'm happy it stayed with the FIP, I just hope now that it's like, right, you know, the sport is widely recognised enough now to get a bit more serious, I think.
And you talk about infrastructure and everything that kind of needs to happen for padel to grow sustainably. You know, coach education, like you say, programs, junior academies.
Yeah.
We talk about, well, coach education. You're off to Dubai next week to do coach education there. I mean, padel in Dubai has just shot up, hasn't it? And what are your thoughts on the infrastructure of, you know, padel and coach education there?
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, padel has really taken off. It's great. You know, almost 500 courts now. And, you know, and going around these clubs, fantastic facilities. I mean, really, you know, good clubs that are being built in, you know, many courts, nice cafes. Like, you know, that's one of the things in Dubai. They do the detail well. You know, they are nice clubs. You couldn't, you know, go around and say that they're not kind of nicely done. They've spent the money on them, everything like that. Next is really the coaching, and I mean, you know, Sweden is a really good country to look at, because they almost followed a similar path a couple of years ago, in that great facilities, and they're bringing coaches in from outside to deliver, you know, the coaching. But, you know, especially in Dubai, it's a very transient, like, population that live there. You know, people they come for a year or two, you know, and then they leave. And the problem with the clubs is that they just don't get that consistency. So, you know, if a coach comes and he stays for 6 months while he's learning English and he's delivering some lessons, you know, completely independently of the other coaches in the club, and then he leaves, it just makes the experience a bit disjointed. And that's part of the reason why I feel like they don't have, like, performance junior academies. They don't really have, you know, performance training. It's very much, you know, it's in high demand. So there's a lot of court bookings, and there's a lot of individual lessons. And individual lessons, as we know, whenever we travel, are easy for coaches, aren't they, really? You know, you get your basket, you have one person down the other end, you know, you feed the ball in, and that's what we see. And we see a lot of, you know, bamos and hit the ball. It's not structured. Whereas when you have a group lesson of 4 players, I mean, padel is for 4 players, right? So, you know, it makes sense to have a group of 4. you need to have a decent coaching experience and need to understand how to organise these lessons in order to deliver a good lesson. Otherwise you end up, having a basketball's queuing everyone up, which we absolutely hate, and they just feed the balls like this, and the people run around, and that's where I feel like, in Dubai and probably in many places, there needs to be a change. Like, there needs to be a better level of coach education so that, coaches are going and delivering great 4-person, lessons. And, and that is better for the club because they're having more people on their court receiving lessons. And if they do good coach education, they'll have more local people or people that stay for longer, with that structure, rather than having people that come, they come for 6 months here and then they'll go to, somewhere else for 6 months, and then they're dotting around, and you can't gain any structure. So I'm excited for that trip. We're going to go and we're going to do a core skills coach education, which is really, the how to coach, and we see a lot of these courses being delivered around the world, and a lot of those are, how to hit your bandeja, basically. It's how to play. But what we're really trying to do is to teach how to coach. And then we're going to do a junior coaching workshop, which is basically helping people set up their junior academies, what the exercises they can do, how they can organise numbers of juniors on a court, because again, we don't want queuing. And then we'll do, group performance lessons. So, the type of drills we can do really to get, these players on a court, because, and we've seen it, you go in there and you say, right, we're going to do a lesson of 4, and often the player says, yeah, but I want an individual, because they're used to doing individuals. But when they actually do the groups and it's engaging and they're working on their shots and they're having technical time and tactical time on the court, they come off and go, wow, I really enjoyed that 4-person lesson. The problem is it's more difficult for coaches to deliver that, and so they don't, and therefore the mindset of the player is now, I want an individual lesson. So baby steps, but the plan is to try and make some of those changes in Dubai.
Giving really good group lessons is key, isn't it? Because we speak to a lot of clubs that have just put courts up, and they're trying to get as many people on the court, as many people enjoying paddle as possible, and you see a lot of coaches coming in, and they're mainly focusing, like you say, on individual lessons, because also the players in their minds, they're probably used to having group lessons that aren't as high quality as they would like, so they come in for individuals, and so, but for the club, it's, if coaches can give really good group lessons, then suddenly you've got so many more players in the club enjoying the game and just growing that membership base.
And also they're just so much more specific to paddle. Yes, in an individual lesson you could work a little bit on technique, for example, like you can focus more attention, it's normal, but the amount of exercises and kind of condition drills you can do with 4 players on a court, I mean, you have so much more variety rather than a one-on-one. And I actually think that there's so many coaches out there, if they had a better understanding of how to organise that group, it's as easy as giving an individual lesson, So I really am hoping to go and to try and to change some minds there when we're talking about setting up these group lessons. But, for me, that's one thing that when the sport is developing in these different countries, that's the one thing that coaches need to work on, is understanding how to do good group lessons and everything that goes along with that, right? Like communication, lesson structure, demonstration, soft skills, all of that is part of it. But if coaches can do a good job of that, then clubs will be more successful.
Talk about the different skills that coaches have got, like you say, organisation, lesson structure. I'm going to Spain next week to train.
Yeah. You're excited about that as well.
Well, I am. Yeah, as I'm looking outside in the grey as well, and the rain. But no. So interestingly, a lot of coaches. Well, the mindset I think with coaches is that they don't train themselves, and they perhaps don't play matches themselves, and they are a coach, and therefore they're just they give advice. But it's interesting, isn't it? Especially with emerging countries where perhaps you've got a lot of tennis coaches transitioning to paddle. How important do you think is that ability for actually coaches to go and play, learn the game, train, play matches as well as coaching? I think it's just like you say, a key skill that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's crucial, isn't it? Like if you think back to our tennis days as well, like being able to play well is key, and not only so you can demonstrate what good looks like, but also, so you can be credible when you're training at a higher level. But also, there's going to come times where you want to make that situation more difficult for your student, and the best way to do that is for you to play, a little bit higher level. And particularly in these countries where Padel is developing, it's really important, I think, to for the coaches to continue to improve their level, because one thing we're seeing is that they're playing for a year or two, and then they go into coaching, and then it's almost like, right, well, they've stopped their playing career, but really they could probably play another 4 or 5 years, continue to improve their playing, and they would be better coaches for it. So I think it's really important, and even for myself, like, I've been playing for 10 years, competing for 10 years, and now I'm probably doing more coaching than competing. But to go and to play like the World Champs for the week makes me come away and think, keeps me thinking tactically about the game, and what things to work on. And I think it's, as a coach, well, and as a player and as a person, you want to always be trying to improve yourself. So it makes sense to go and to train. And I know for you, you're super excited about it. It's great, isn't it, to be able to train new skills and to work on different things. I mean, what are you looking to work on for these next couple of weeks?
I think a combination of a lot of repetition for me. I think I have a few technical bits that I want to focus on. So a lot of basket work, but combined with match play. You talked about there, competing and the benefits of that. Obviously, both of us, you've competed a lot in Padel. I've both competed in tennis a lot. So the process of competing for me is something that I've always done. But I think doing that in Padel as well, it just teaches you. It's funny, isn't it? You do a combination of the training. So you do a lot of kind of process work. Then you go onto the match court and you can sort of see what worked well, what didn't work well. Then you can go back to the training court and having that sort of consistent training matches together, I think really yields like good results. So.
I think so. I mean, I think one of the things that really helped me like earlier on with the Padel was almost like submersing myself in, a really Padel environment. And if you're, I know your schedule is, training in the morning, and then you can play matches in the afternoon, you do your recovery time or gym session, outside of that. And, to do that for, like you say, repeat that for a few weeks, you come out the side of that. It's a bit like learning a language, really. You're doing it without thinking, and that's really what you want. And at the moment, Spain is the best place for that, to go, to train, to play at a high level. And I know for you, over that period of time, you'll see huge improvements.
Yeah, and like we said, it's this time of year as well in Europe to go outside. Go to somewhere sunny, go and play in the sunshine outside. It's particularly in the UK where we don't have the indoor facilities, but it's a real opportunity to get as much training as you can when places where the weather's good. Yeah,
and learn a bit of Spanish probably.
Yeah,
that also helps your Padel.
Paddle specific.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I mean it'll be great. I'm actually a bit jealous. I wish I could be doing that as well, but. I mean, well, the weather's not bad in Dubai, so I can't complain too much. Yeah.
So, should we jump into overrated, underrated this week? I know you've been looking forward to that.
Yeah, I do. I do enjoy this podcast. One. Yeah, go for it.
Well, do you want to start? So, overrated
for coaches. Yeah. So for coaching, let's start with underrated. So for me, underrated is. I'm going to use two things. Is communication. I think that's key, and organisation, and I'm going to put those two together just because, so often players or coaches are getting straight in with their lesson, and they're immediately thinking about doing a different shot, or they're trying to rush between shots in a lesson, and I feel like having a nice organised lesson where you know what you're working on, you know what drills you're going to do, how you're going to separate it up, and how you're going to rotate the players is key. And if you change during your lesson, that's absolutely fine, but having that kind of organisation in your mind is really important, rather than going and saying, right, what are we going to do today, and just
see what happens,
and just winging it on the court. So for me, underrated is just organising that, and we remember what it's like to start coaching. If you want to write that down, like that is absolutely fine. Like I know a lot of coaches when they start, they want to write a little bit of a lesson plan, whatever helps them, keep that structure is absolutely fine. I think that for me is underrated.
Yeah.
Do you want to do an underrated, or shall I go into overrated?
You got another one, have you?
I've got an overrated.
I've got an overrated as well.
Yeah.
But you go for it.
Okay, I mean, for me, overrated is like feeding, many balls in a session. And this is something that I see almost every club that we go to, and we see the coach feeding, and they're thinking that they are trying to give their students or their players a workout, and so they stand with the basket, and it's like, and they're firing balls in there, and the player is like running like a headless chicken to try and get these balls back. And in the coach's mind, it's like, right, that student now has had a good lesson, they're sweating, that was hard work. Now, I'm not saying that it can't be part of a good lesson. You can have a cardio element, or you can have something, point specific, where you do push them a little bit physically. But just to hit loads and loads of balls for them to be running round, it doesn't allow you to do the technical part. If you're there to work on their skills. So I feel like if you're, doing a kind of machine gun approach to your feeding, often coaches do this when they've got 4 people and they've got them all at the other end, and they think, I don't want waiting in this queue, so I'm going to go boom, 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 and then they go around really quickly. But then you've not achieved either. You haven't done the technique because you haven't had time, because you've been feeding so fast, and also they're still waiting. So it does come back a bit to the organisation, but for me, like, overrated is hitting lots and lots of balls in that session to tire your students out.
It's it's repetition and quality, isn't it? That's the difference. If it's just repetition and the quality's not there, then essentially you're potentially training bad habits, aren't you? And they're just being ingrained more.
And you've got to think, you've got a student in front of you, you're working on something, so you need them to understand, you need to show them what good looks like, so that they know what they should be doing. And then you need to give them time to process. So, feeding a few balls, letting them practice, giving some minor corrections along the way so that they feel comfortable with the skill, rather than, being a ball machine and just hitting loads of balls in that corner and being like, well, they will get it eventually. So it's quite difficult to be a good coach to do this correctly. So, for me, it's, take your time as a coach. Make sure your students understand clearly. Like, almost, I'm not saying slow the lesson down to the point where people are bored, but, slow it down enough that you can communicate what you need to communicate. They can practice what they want to practice, and then you can move on and maybe do an element later in your lesson of, playing fast and doing something a little bit more cardio orientated.
It leads quite well onto my overrated. I'm just thinking of your analogy of machine gun feeding. I think machine gun feedback is quite interesting, isn't it? I think for me, overrated is, as a coach, it's all about just give as much feedback as you can. Just the more feedback, the better, because the player eventually will get it. And I think actually choosing the right feedback and the feedback that's right for that player, it might be different for each player. Type of communication might work with this player, but actually this player probably needs a little bit less, feedback, but perhaps on something specific. This player might like a bit more feedback, but machine gun feedback where it's just overload of information, and the player comes away with 10 bits of feedback on a certain shot, and they're actually come back going, oh, I'm so confused that I don't even know what I'm working on now.
Yeah, and that is really common, actually. That was a good overrated, that one.
Thank you.
Yeah. No, but that's so common, isn't it? We see that all the time, where it's like the coach is telling the student everything that they possibly know about paddle and almost showing off their expertise, when really it's not about the coach, it's about the student, and identifying the 1, 2, 3 things that can help that student improve, rather than giving them 35 different bits of information about their paddle experience. And I think that was a great one.
Thank you. So should we run through the community question this week?
Yeah, let's do it.
So the question is, I've had several lessons now, but I'm actually finding that my improvement is not going as quickly as I would have liked. Can you give me any advice to help speed up my improvement?
Yeah, this is actually, we've had this before, I think, a few times in our community, and I think there's a few different things. Firstly, whenever you start coaching, or receiving coaching, it's like, what is the process of that? And if you've been playing for a long time, the number one job of the coach at that point is to almost break your bad habits. Players come with a lot of bad habits, especially if they've played for a while. Then you're going to see a dip in performance initially, probably when you change some techniques, because you're now needing to get used to different habits and more kind of positive ways of playing. So there will be a little bit of a dip there. I think the other thing around coaching is understanding, firstly, what your coach is trying to get you to do, and going back to what we've just talked about, and in understanding, the clear, simple, why are we doing this, and the tips, for me specifically to my, for my game that I can improve. Understanding those few tips, makes a big difference in improvement, rather than, having a sea of information and you don't know what to pick out. So, and this is something that, you can discuss with your coach. So you finish your lesson, you say to your coach, right, I'm going to go and play now with my friends, or this week, what should I focus on if you're not sure? And I want 3 things, and if the coach gives you that, then you've got those 3 things to focus on. And then I think the next step is making sure that when you do your social games and you're playing for fun with your friends, or, entering friendly leagues, that you are focusing on those things. Because, we have those lessons where, we go through the tips, we get them towards the end of the lesson, really getting into some good habits. And then they go away and play, 15 social matches in the next week. And then they come back having not thought at all about what we did in our session. And you almost feel like you're not back to square one, but, you feel like that has been wasted practice time. So, for me, it's kind of focusing on those, on those areas while you're having your recreational and your friendly games as well. Yeah,
that understanding the why is so important, isn't it? And I think a really good coach is also someone that sort of actively gives that reasoning, because a lot of players don't ask, why are we doing this? And obviously what we're recommending is that you do, as a player, do ask, if you don't understand. But it's also the job of the coach to say, look, this is what we're going to do, and this is why we're doing this. Because ultimately, like you say, the question didn't say if they practiced in between, but you want them to understand it enough so that they go away and they understand what they're trying to do, and also understand, I think this is key, the outcome of a shot, if it is going in the net, or if it's going long or whatever, what's the reasoning for that? And if you can self-correct as a player, I think that's a really good sign as a coach. If you as a player understand what you're doing, you can self-correct yourself, then I think you're onto a really winning path there.
Definitely. And I think, we're talking about why, and, the player understanding. A good coach should give you the why. And also a good coach should really find a way of communicating with you so that you can connect the why to your game, like, if that makes sense. So, the information that I might give you around changing a technique might be different to another student, or to, a group of kids learning a game, for example. And so it's kind of connecting that why with you, so that when you change your technique, you know why, but you also know specifically what factors you need to work on. And so, again, it comes down to clarity of communication and clarity in your lessons. If you can get that right, then you will continue to improve. And if you are a player that you feel a bit confused, that you're not quite sure why, and maybe you have different coaches, and one day you do a session with this coach and another coach, and I always think, as a player, don't be afraid to ask why. Like, so often players are thinking, well, my coach knows everything and I don't want to ask because we've just done a whole lesson, but it really doesn't hurt to say, okay, why am I changing this technique? And what do I need to focus on for here? And after this lesson, continue my education. What should I be focusing on, on the practice court after this? So, ask, I think, is the key.
Yeah, I think the coach is a guide, isn't it, really, as opposed to someone that's just telling you information, and you sort of then wait for the next week to wait for that more information. It's that guiding figure actually teaching you how, almost self-coaching yourself, how can you get the best out of yourself, because it's like with all sports, isn't it? Well, once you're on that field or on the pitch, you're the only one on the court. So if you don't know what's going wrong or going right in a match, and you're always reliant on that external input, it's going to be difficult. Definitely.
And I'd be interested to hear from our viewers and the audience of what do you think is good coaching? Like, what's your experience when you've worked with a good coach, the things that they've done, and either put it down in the comments if you're watching this on YouTube, or write to us at the Padel School when it on Instagram or on other socials, because we're always interested to know what makes the players tick and what helps them improve. And well, to conclude our podcast, absolute pleasure as always, Tom. Next week we won't be here. You'll be in Marbella, I'll be in Dubai. And so we will probably have to wait till the week after to do a recap.
Yeah, look forward to it.